It was a rare night when my parents decided to go out for a late dinner, leaving me home alone. I was used to being by myself, and the house felt familiar, even comforting. The rain had started earlier in the evening, and by the time I settled in on the couch with a movie, it had turned into a steady downpour. The house was quiet, save for the soft patter of rain against the windows. I had locked the doors and checked the windows, making sure everything was secure. With the lights dimmed and the glow of the TV casting long shadows, I felt a sense of calm, almost like the rain was a protective barrier, cocooning me from the outside world. As the movie played, I started to doze off, the warmth of the blanket and the steady rhythm of the rain lulling me into a light sleep. That's when I heard it, a soft knock at the front door. At first, I thought I had imagined it, a sound conjured by the edges of a dream. But then it came again, louder this time. Knock, knock, knock. My heart skipped a beat as I sat up, the blanket slipping off my shoulders. Who could be knocking at this hour in this weather? My parents weren't due back for a couple more hours, and I wasn't expecting anyone. Cautiously, I got up and walked to the front door, my footsteps echoing in the silent house. I peered through the peephole, but all I could see was darkness. The rain was coming down in sheets, and the porch light cast an eerie glow, illuminating nothing but the empty doorstep. I stood there for a moment, my hand hovering over the door handle. The knocking had stopped, but the unease it left behind lingered. I told myself it was probably just the wind, or maybe a stray branch tapping against the house. I turned away, but then knock, knock, knock. This time, the sound was insistent, almost desperate. I jumped, my nerves on edge. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed my parents' number. It rang and rang, but no one answered. They were likely still at dinner, enjoying their night out. Taking a deep breath, I decided to ignore the knocking. I didn't want to open the door, not without knowing who or what was on the other side. I walked back to the living room, trying to convince myself that it was nothing. But then the knocks came again, louder and more frantic, like someone was trying to get in. Panic set in. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it a neighbor in trouble? A lost traveler? Or something more sinister? I grabbed a kitchen knife, feeling foolish but needing the comfort of something in my hand. I approached the door again, this time calling out, "Who's there?" The knocking stopped. There was no response, just the sound of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. I hesitated, then shouted louder, "Who is it?" For a long moment, there was silence. Then, finally, a voice. A low, raspy whisper, barely audible over the rain. "Let me in." My heart pounded in my chest. The voice didn't sound familiar, and the way it spoke sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't a request. It was a demand. I backed away from the door, my mind screaming at me to stay away. I ran to the back of the house, checking the locks on the back door and the windows, making sure everything was secure. I turned off the lights, plunging the house into darkness, hoping to make it seem like no one was home. But the knocking continued, growing more intense, more insistent. It moved from the front door to the windows, then back again, as if whoever or whatever was out there was trying every possible way to get inside. I crouched in the hallway, clutching the knife, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The knocking was relentless, and now it was accompanied by a scraping sound, like nails dragging across the wooden door. In the darkness, my thoughts grew wild. I had heard stories, urban legends about strange visitors who knocked at your door in the dead of night. Some said they were spirits, others said they were something worse. But all the stories agreed on one thing: you should never let them in. The voice came again, this time closer, almost right next to me. "Let me in." I stifled a scream, my body trembling with fear. It sounded like the voice was inside the house now, whispering from the shadows. But that was impossible. I hadn't heard the door open, hadn't heard anything come in. I forced myself to stand, inching toward the living room. The TV was still on, casting flickering light across the room. The knocking had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that was even more terrifying. As I stood in the doorway, trying to make sense of what was happening, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The front door was ajar, the chain lock dangling uselessly. I was certain I had locked it. Absolutely certain. But now it was open, just a crack, as if someone had slipped in while I wasn't looking. I backed away, my eyes darting around the room, searching for any sign of an intruder. Then I heard it, the faint sound of breathing, coming from the hallway behind me. I turned slowly, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run, but I was frozen in place. A shadow moved in the darkness, just beyond the reach of the TV's glow. The breathing grew louder, closer, until I could feel it on the back of my neck. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move, couldn't think. The voice whispered one last time, right in my ear, "I'm already inside." I don't remember what happened next. When I came to, I was lying on the floor, the rain still pouring outside, the house eerily quiet. The front door was wide open, the knife still clutched in my hand. I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing. I checked every room, every closet, but the house was empty. Whoever or whatever had been there was gone. My parents found me hours later, sitting on the couch in shock, the front door still open to the night. I tried to explain what had happened, but the words wouldn't come. How could I tell them about the voice, the knocking, the feeling that something had been inside with me? The police came, but there was no sign of forced entry, no evidence of anyone else being in the house. They chalked it up to a bad dream, the product of an overactive imagination fueled by too many horror movies. But I know what I heard, what I felt. I'm never home alone at night anymore, and I always check the locks twice, but the fear never leaves me. Sometimes, when the rain is heavy and the night is dark, I hear a faint knocking at the door, and I know that whatever was there that night isn't gone. It's just waiting for me to be alone again. I had just moved into my new apartment, a cozy one-bedroom in an older building. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was mine, a place where I could finally have some peace and quiet. The building had character, creaky floors, old-fashioned fixtures, and mirrors in every room, some of which had clearly been there for decades. It was the mirrors that caught my attention when I first toured the apartment. They weren't just decorative. They were built into the walls, large and imposing. The one in the living room was the most striking, an ornate, full-length mirror with an intricately carved wooden frame. The landlord said it was original to the building, a piece of history. I was too busy unpacking and settling in to pay much attention to the mirrors at first. I worked long hours at my new job and spent my evenings trying to turn the apartment into a home. But it wasn't long before I started to notice something off. At night, when the apartment was quiet and I was alone, I'd catch glimpses of movement in the mirrors, just out of the corner of my eye. It was always the same, something shifting in the reflection, a shadow that didn't belong. I turned to look, but nothing would be there. I told myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the light, but the feeling of unease lingered. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I was in the bathroom washing up. The bathroom mirror was smaller than the one in the living room, but just as old. As I splashed water on my face, I glanced up and froze. The reflection wasn't right. It was me, but my reflection was delayed, a split second behind my movements. I blinked, convinced I was overtired. I moved my hand in front of my face, and my reflection followed, but not quite in sync. It was subtle, but enough to make my skin crawl. I stepped back, staring at the mirror, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. But then my reflection did something that sent a jolt of fear through me. It smiled. A slow, creeping smile that didn't reach my eyes. I stumbled out of the bathroom, my heart racing. I refused to go back in there that night, opting to sleep on the couch instead. But even there, I wasn't safe. The large mirror in the living room loomed over me, and though I tried to avoid looking at it, I could feel it watching me. That night, I had the worst nightmares. I dreamed that my reflection had climbed out of the mirror and was standing over me as I slept, its smile growing wider and more twisted. I woke up drenched in sweat, but the fear didn't leave me. I avoided mirrors for days after that, but in a small apartment, that was nearly impossible. the strange occurrences escalated. I'd see my reflection move when I wasn't, or I'd catch it lingering in the mirror when I'd already walked away. It wasn't just in the apartment either. At work, in public restrooms, anywhere there was a mirror, I felt like something was off. One night, as I was brushing my teeth, I noticed something terrifying. My reflection was staring at me, even though my eyes were fixed on the sink. It wasn't just a delayed response anymore, it was doing things I wasn't. As I watched, paralyzed with fear, it raised a hand and pressed it against the glass, as if trying to reach out to me. I backed away, but the reflection didn't move. It kept its hand on the mirror, its eyes locked on mine, that same eerie smile stretching across its face. I grabbed my phone and took a picture, desperate to capture proof that I wasn't losing my mind. When I looked at the photo, my reflection was normal. But as I glanced back at the mirror, I saw something even more horrifying. My reflection was no longer alone. Behind it, in the shadows of the bathroom, stood another figure. Indistinct, but unmistakably there. It was as if something was with me in the reflection, watching, waiting. I couldn't stay in the apartment anymore. I fled, leaving most of my belongings behind. I checked into a hotel, too terrified to return. But even in the hotel room, with its modern, clean mirrors, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was wrong. My reflection seemed normal, but I couldn't shake the fear that it was just biding its time. Days passed, and I tried to avoid mirrors as much as possible. But I couldn't hide from them forever. Eventually, I had to face the fear. I decided to confront it, to go back to the apartment and prove to myself that it was all in my head. When I returned, the apartment was just as I had left it, but it felt different, colder somehow. I stood in front of the living room mirror, staring at my reflection, daring it to move, to do something. But it didn't. It just stood there, mimicking my every move like a normal reflection should. I started to relax, thinking that maybe I had imagined everything, that the stress of the move and the new job had gotten to me. But then, as I turned to leave, I heard a faint tapping sound. I froze, my blood running cold. The tapping grew louder, and I realized it was coming from inside the mirror. I turned back slowly, and there it was, my reflection, smiling that same twisted smile, its eyes gleaming with something dark and malevolent. It raised its hand again, pressing it against the glass, and this time, I watched in horror as the glass began to crack under its touch. I backed away, but the reflection didn't stop. The cracks spread across the mirror, spiderwebbing out from where its hand pressed against the surface. Then, with a shattering crash, the mirror broke, pieces falling to the floor in a shower of glass. But the horror didn't end there. Where the mirror had been, there was now a gaping black void, and from that void, something began to emerge. It was me, or rather, my reflection, stepping out of the broken mirror, its twisted smile never faltering. I ran, stumbling out of the apartment, the sound of glass crunching underfoot and the faint, mocking laughter of my reflection echoing in my ears. I didn't stop until I was out of the building, gasping for breath, my heart pounding with terror. I never went back, couldn't. I left the apartment behind, along with everything in it, but the fear still haunts me. I can't look in a mirror without feeling that same dread, that same sense of something watching me from the other side. And sometimes, late at night, I hear that faint tapping sound, as if something is trying to find its way back to me, to take my place once and for all. After the divorce, I needed a fresh start, a place where my daughter Lily and I could begin again. We moved into a charming old house on the edge of town, a place with history and character. The rent was affordable and the neighborhood was quiet, which was exactly what we needed. The house was bigger than we needed, with 3 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a spacious living room. The realtor mentioned that it had been on the market for a while, which didn't surprise me. Old houses often come with quirks that modern buyers shy away from. But I liked the idea of giving it new life, of making it our own. Lily was excited, too. She picked out her bedroom, the one at the end of the hall, and spent the first few days exploring every nook and cranny. I was happy to see her smile again, to hear her laughter fill the house. It was just the two of us now, and I was determined to make this place a home. The first few nights were peaceful. We settled into a routine, and I began to feel a sense of calm that I hadn't felt in a long time. But then, strange things started happening. It began with little things. A creaking floorboard, a flickering light, a draft where there shouldn't have been one. I brushed it off as the house settling, old wiring, or just the natural quirks of an old building. But then Lily started talking about her new friend. She was playing in her room one afternoon when she mentioned it. "Mommy, do you want to meet my new friend?" she asked, her voice cheerful. I smiled, thinking she was playing make-believe. "Sure, sweetie. Who's your friend?" She pointed to the corner of the room, where the light was dim. "She's right there. Her name is Sarah." A chill ran down my spine. The corner she pointed to was empty, of course, but Lily's serious expression made my skin crawl. I knelt beside her, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is Sarah nice?" Lily nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, she talks to me at night when I'm scared. She says she used to live here." I forced a smile, my heart pounding. "That's nice, sweetie. But remember, if anything ever scares you, you can come to me. Okay?" Lily just smiled and went back to playing, but I couldn't shake the unease that had settled over me. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. The house felt different now, less welcoming, as if something unseen was watching us. The disturbances grew more frequent. At night, I'd hear footsteps in the hallway, soft and deliberate, like someone pacing. The lights would flicker on and off, and the air would grow cold, even though the weather was warm. And always, there was that sense of being watched, of something lurking just out of sight. Lily, on the other hand, seemed unfazed. She talked about Sarah often, telling me about their conversations, about how Sarah would play with her toys when I wasn't around. It unnerved me, but I didn't want to scare her by reacting too strongly. One night, I woke up to the sound of whispering. It was faint, almost inaudible, but it was there, voices coming from the walls. I sat up in bed, my heart racing, trying to pinpoint the source. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if a conversation was happening right on the other side of the wall. I crept out of bed and followed the sound, my hands trembling. It led me to Lily's room. The door was slightly ajar, and as I pushed it open, the whispering stopped. The room was dark, except for the soft glow of Lily's nightlight. She was asleep, her little body curled up under the blankets, peaceful and unaware. But I wasn't alone in the room. The air was thick with a presence, something cold and malevolent. I could feel it pressing in on me, suffocating me. I backed out of the room, my heart pounding, and fled to the safety of my own bed. The next morning, I was exhausted, but determined to find out what was happening. I searched the house, looking for anything that could explain the strange occurrences, but there was nothing. No hidden speakers, no drafts, nothing that could account for the whispers or the cold spots. Desperate, I turned to the internet, searching for any information about the house's history. What I found chilled me to the bone. The house had a dark past. Previous owners had reported strange occurrences, and there were rumors of a child who had died there under mysterious circumstances. Her name was Sarah. I knew I couldn't stay in the house any longer, not with Lily at risk. I began making plans to move, but the house had other ideas. That night, the activity reached a terrifying peak. The footsteps in the hallway were louder, the whispers more frantic, and the temperature dropped so low that I could see my breath. Lily was restless, tossing and turning in her bed, as if something was disturbing her sleep. I rushed to her room, determined to get her out of the house, but when I opened the door, I froze. The room was dark, the nightlight flickering on and off, casting eerie shadows on the walls. And in the corner, where Lily had pointed out her friend, I saw it. A figure, faint but unmistakable, standing in the shadows. It was a little girl, her eyes hollow, her face twisted in sorrow. She opened her mouth to speak, but all that came out was a whisper, a desperate plea. "Help me," I screamed, grabbing Lily and running from the room. But as I turned to leave, The door slammed shut, trapping us inside. The whispers grew louder, filling the room, pressing in on me from all sides. I clutched Lily to my chest, trying to shield her from whatever was happening. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The room was silent, the air still. The door creaked open, and the presence was gone. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed a few essentials, bundled Lily into the car, and drove away, leaving the house and whatever haunted it behind. We never went back. I found us a new place to live, far away from that cursed house. But the memory lingers, the fear that someday, somehow, the whispers will find us again. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and Lily is asleep, I think I can still hear it. The faint, desperate whisper of a little girl, lost and alone, calling out from the shadows, begging for help.